Dave, thank you very much. I was just going to say that this meeting is being recorded, but you beat me to it.
The computer said it.
So just to notice, I don't see a lot of visitors here. In fact, I don't think I see any other than Ann and Vinza. So
Kirk is
welcome
coming
to
on
everybody.
now.
The meeting is being recorded, and please know that if you don't want to be visually recorded, you should switch off the camera and speak. If there's anything in your surroundings or any reason you don't want to be visualized, that's your right. But we will try to recognize you. Just let us know if you'd like to speak. This is an official meeting of the commissioners for the Chuckanut Community Forest Park District, and it's being held today, May 26th, 2021. And we would first like to just review our mission, which you always do, and that is the mission of the Chuckanut Community Forest Park District is to ensure the entirety of the property is protected in perpetuity and public ownership with respect to its ecological, recreation, and educational functions, and to serve as a fiscal mechanism through which the district, via tax levy, will repay the city of Bellingham for the Greenways Endowment Fund loan. Due to COVID-19 restrictions, and the governor's stay-at-home order, we are no longer meeting in person. However, I'd like to review that with our lawyer today to see how that projects into the future, and to see when and if that should change given the changes that the governor has currently made in his order. Could you actually comment on that at this point before we start, just to let us think about how we're going to move forward with our meetings? Is it now possible to meet in in-person meeting, Mr. Carmichael?
I do believe it's possible. There are still
some restrictions.
Yeah, there's still restrictions, particularly on people who are not fully vaccinated. We do have in front of us this evening a potential amendment to our policies and procedures. I thank Commissioner Brown to pointing out an oversight. Those policies and procedures were drafted when we met on Thursdays at 7 o'clock, and that needs to be changed as well. I've actually just changed that as we've been talking. The reason for making the change and why it's on the agenda tonight was to allow for the board to select an alternate location, date, and time for the regular meeting, and the process for doing that, which would require 10 days prior notice at various notification locations. And so that's the process. I understand the Fairhaven Library is still closed, and I don't know when it's going to reopen. I don't know if anybody has any information on that. If we want to meet in person, we probably will need to select a different location at this meeting for our next meeting. And then if it's outside, we have a little more flexibility. If it's inside, we will probably want to put some clarifications in the notice about what's required for vaccinated versus unvaccinated individuals.
Come on. With that clarification, why don't we move on to our actual formal agenda, and we'll take that up in the order that we would otherwise do it. I'd like to do roll call at this point. I'm Frank James, and I am present. John Hymas. I think John's not yet with us. And John McLaughlin.
Present.
Thank you, John. And John Brown.
Here.
And Hugh Beatty.
Here.
Thank you.
John Hymas is here.
Hi.
Oh, he's here. Okay, great.
Yep.
Great. Sorry, I light up like a... Sorry about that. I need to silence my phone. I forgot. All right. So we have not just a quorum, but we have everyone present at this point. And I'd like to then move on to our first consideration, that is to look at last meeting's agenda and see if there are any additions, corrections to the prior meeting. And before that, we'll just look at this meeting's agenda and ask for any additions or corrections to it. So is the agenda as presented, does it need to be modified in any way, commissioners? Everything on there, what we need to deal with.
I move that we accept the agenda as it is stated, with the addition of the resolution that Bob Carmichael mentioned regarding monthly meetings and times and places. And we can take that up later.
We have a motion from Commissioner Brown to approve the minutes as amended with the additional consideration he described. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Hearing a second, I'd like to take a roll call vote since we're a little difficult to do otherwise. John Hymas,
Aye.
John McLaughlin,
Aye.
John Brown,
Aye.
me, and I too consent to that. Hugh raised his hand. I'll take that as a yes.
Yes.
So unanimously, we approve the agenda for this meeting with the addition of that additional item as discussed. We'd like to open the meeting to any public comment, and please limit your discussion to 3 minutes. And I think we have 2 guests that I saw, and would either Vince or Ann, or we have another guest too, or Kirk is here tonight too. Hi, Kirk. Would any of you like to make a statement at the beginning of the meeting?
No, I have no statement. Thank you.
And Ann, would you like to say anything?
I really don't have a whole lot to say other than I'm real interested in the future of the Chuckanut Community Forest and would like to help in any way I can.
Thank you, Ann. It's good to see you again. And Kirk, anything you'd like to share with us?
No real comments, although it would be nice if when you start meeting in person that you continue to record the meetings.
We always record the meetings and they're always made available to the public. So if you'd like that is a routine thing that we always do. We've discussed, Kirk, the possibility of also having a visual, an online component ongoing as well. So usually we record them as an audio tape, but if we do, is some technical challenges to getting it to doing both in person and recording it like this. But if we can address those, we'll make both those available. And thanks for your concern about that. We agree wholeheartedly. Hearing no other desires to make public comment, I'd like to just acknowledge that our legal counsel is here, Bob Carmichael, and our secretary is here, Robin Albro, in addition to the commissioners. And if anybody else pops up, if somebody get pointed out to me, I'd appreciate it. I don't always see them as I only see so many people across the top. I'd like to also, at this point, it rings on my computer, even my phones are turned off. I apologize. If the other thing is we have our minutes of April 28th now to look at, and if you could look at those and see if there are any additions or corrections to the earlier minutes, I would appreciate that. You can take a minute to look at those if you like. And then if there are any corrections or additions, I'd be happy to entertain those as we move forward. So any additions or corrections to the April 28th, 2021 meeting?
I move adoption.
You moves approval of those meetings, acceptance of those meetings. Do I hear a second?
Yes.
Second.
Any further discussion? Has everybody had a chance to review them?
Yep.
Thank you, Robin, for taking excellent notes, and especially that review of the noxious weeds discussion that we had. I appreciate your thoroughness in that. And I'd like to then vote. Why don't we just do it by acclamation and say all those that would like to approve, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously and minutes as written are accepted. The next item on our agenda is the Park Board Advisory Meeting report. John Hymas, do you have anything to report about the last meeting of the Park Board?
No, I don't. I'm hoping that John Bleffin is in attendance, but no, they're really late on getting minutes back to me and stuff, and I'm looking forward to live meetings.
All right.
Sorry.
No worries. Thank you very much. And so we'll postpone any report on that until either John Bleffin joins us or next meeting when we have the minutes from those meetings. Thank you, John. Old business, update on the master plan and steering committee. There will be future meetings. There's one scheduled for ourselves on our meeting on the 28th of July board meeting about with Annalisa Burns presenting, and we have an in-person meeting, and we're going to try to talk about how to do that in the future. In terms of what's going on with the master planning process, a number of us have been designated, including Vinca as a guest, to attend the master planning process discussion. Are there any other inputs or discussions about that master planning steering committee process? Yes, Vinca?
I heard when I watched last night's city council meeting, or I'm sorry, was it Monday night? And Nicole Oliver did say when talking about, they were discussing the new rules or changes to the BMC regarding park usage. And she did mention that the master plan for Chuckanut Forest will be starting in June of this year. That's the first I heard that there was an actual time frame. Meanwhile, I have not heard anything about scheduling.
All right.
So there
I have something.
Bob, yes. Bob Carmichael?
Thank you. I wanted to mention the discussion that Frank James and Ann Eisinger and I had between meetings. Frank was to get in touch with Ann about the master planning process, and particularly some of the input which we had provided. The outline John McLaughlin graciously did on very short notice. And I thought we had a good discussion. Would now be the time to
Now would be the time.
some of that information, or would you rather have that done later?
I think we can do it now. I'd just like to clarify further that originally at our last meeting, as some of you recall that were there and those that weren't, just to refresh, the Parks Division had originally planned to have this as a Fairhaven Park master plan, and we engaged in a discussion about that, and it was decided at our prior meetings that would not be the case. They had allocated $25,000, a very small amount compared to what we believed is the correct amount, and they'd included Fairhaven Park as part of that process, which again, we were not particularly pleased with, as our understanding had been it would be a master planning process specifically for the Chuckanut Community Forest. So based on that, the parks pivoted and agreed to our concerns to have this be a master planning process specifically for the Chuckanut Community Forest. And that if they want a master planning process for the Fairhaven Park, that's fine, but it's separate activity, as the purposes are quite different. After that, and I believe that's currently the plan. After that, we did go to Ann with some questions that we had about the core information that was presented that Ann did in the planning process early on in preparing the pre-study for the actual master planning process. And we asked Ann for some copies of prior documents that we couldn't locate at the time in a format that was easy to use, and had a discussion. And Bob, would you like to summarize that discussion?
Yes, I think there were some important points that the whole board should hear, and perhaps some discussion of next steps, if any. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to Ann, and I'm going to take the liberty, Ann, knowing that you're on the line listening, of summarizing what I heard from you, and then invite you to correct me or add to whatever I say. I did take some pretty detailed notes of our discussion. And one of the things I was looking to hear from Ann was what she thought about the restoration priorities, or actually more generally, what would be the most important thing we should be focused on as a district in the master planning process. And she quickly pointed out two things to me. One was there should be a designation of the forest as open space, that might be the most critical thing, and that we should, that should be our number one objective. Number two would be to better define the built environment in the forest. Right now, the easement that we have outlines a number of potential different uses that would be not necessarily consistent with a natural park. And what we should be considering is, how do we define and limit the infrastructure or built environment in the forest? And that should be one of the objectives of the master plan, to provide that definition. So I thought those were two really useful comments. I also pressed Ann, and I can't wait to hear what you say, Ann, about my summary, but I also pressed her about what would be the restoration priorities for this forest. And we've given some thought to that. We did a policy document on it. And what I recall Ann focusing on immediately was perhaps the most important thing, big picture thing from a restoration standpoint, is how to adapt to climate change going forward. More so even than restoring what's there, although that's important. Restoring what's there is critical, but bigger picture is the impacts of climate change on the biota of the forest. Really, there's large grand firs as a significant part of the overstory, for example, and they will suffer with climate change. Trails infringing on wetland buffers are going to be a concern, and the wetlands remaining there is going to be a concern with climate change. So one of the things we should think about including an element in the master plan is how do we adapt to climate change? And I think that was something that we hadn't really, we've talked about that a little bit, but haven't brought it front and center the way Ann was emphasizing it. And I think she made some really good points about that. So those were the three big things that I wrote down from our conversation. I think maybe the other comment she had was the outline was very detailed, and maybe we could cut it down a bit. And I told her that, you know, we tried to be broad, and John did come up with that to make sure that we had everything covered. The other thing and the last thing I wanted to talk about that came out of that meeting with Frank James and Ann Eisinger and myself was a discussion about what level of involvement the Park District would or should have in this master planning process. We talked about, and we've talked about it loosely at the board level, having it be more of a partnership with the city as opposed to merely participant or stakeholder along with other stakeholders at the table. One way to raise that issue would be with an interlocal agreement with the city. I don't know if the city would be amenable to sharing a leadership role with the Park District. If we choose to do that, I could be given direction to draft an interlocal agreement after some discussion. That would be the mechanism for implementing it. Could it be done? Yes. Would the city agree to it? I have no idea. I think there might be some resistance actually at the city. But whether we could overcome that resistance or not, I don't know. How much is it worth to us to do that? These are board decisions. These are policy decisions for the board. And so I thought it would be, you know, given that I just heard that the process is going to be starting in June, if the board decides it wants to assert itself more as more of a partner in this process, I think that needs to, you know, it needs to have that discussion now and make that decision now, and then decide how to best go about trying to accomplish that. But first decide whether that's even something that wants to do. So I think that's a rough summary of the discussion, and I'll hang back and see if Frank or Ann have anything to add as well.
Could I add one more element, Bob? Is it, the other thing that we were seeking from Ann was actually a copy of her recommendations, some of which were not included in the final document, and we really thought some of those may be very important. So it was actually a more detailed and extensive list of additional priorities and issues and recommendations that Ann had made earlier. And we wanted to make sure that those were reviewed prior to this process going forward. That was one other thing in addition to what Bob mentioned.
We do have that. We do have, my office had that, and we sent that on to Robin, who I think sent it on to the city.
Right.
So they have that.
Great. And then Ann, would you like to make any comment at this point about your vision and what Bob and I just reviewed? Are there additional clarifications or comments you'd like to make? And for those who don't know, Ann was the author of the that initial draft study, and then that was then given over to the city for its purposes. Ann?
Sure, thank you. I want to beg your forgiveness. I have a tremor that it's difficult to control in these situations, so I'll do my best. I appreciated the opportunity to speak with both Frank and Bob, and I have, since that conversation, I have also been thinking, I've gone into it, I guess what I call a deep think about the future of the Chuckanut forest, the community forest. I've been going back and looking both at the baseline document, the document that I produced was a baseline document that was required as a part of the conservation easement to define baseline conditions for the forest. And it was quite detailed. I went back and looked at that. I went back and read the conservation easement. I also thought about the future and the future process and how the master plan fits in to that, to the process going forward. I also thought about the Park District's dissolution and the eventual transfer of the conservation easement to a different organization, a qualified organization as specified in the conservation easement. And I have to say, I kind of circled back, and if I can indulge all of you for about 5 minutes and
Please.
share my thoughts.
Please, Ann. Thank you.
Is that okay?
Yes.
I'm going to skip forward a little bit because everyone seems to be focused on the master plan. And I think the master plan is really a good place to avoid, right, for the moment. I want to look forward. I want to look forward to the fact that the Park District eventually will be dissolved. The conservation easement if it is to continue in existence, needs to be transferred to a successor organization, which the most likely one is the Whatcom Land Trust. The Whatcom Land Trust holds a conservation easement on an adjacent property within the contiguous forest of the Chuckanut community forest, the wetland, the large wetland, what's called the inner urban wetland. And as a previous, the first executive director of that land trust, I have had some experience with conservation easements and land dealings, if you will, with that organization. So a few things have come up in my mind, and that is, if this transfer is to occur with the conservation easement intact, it needs to actually align with the mission and the ability of the Whatcom Land Trust to manage that land consistently with the interurban property. In other words, the conservation easement would need to be amended, and it would need to be amended for alignment and for consistency, for management across the board. So everybody has an understanding, the city, the land trust, and all the users for that matter. And so approaching it from that perspective, I immediately started thinking of how the conservation easement could be amended, and how that would fit into this process that you're in right now. If a master plan is developed based on the current conservation easement, let's say the city or the combination of you and the city hire a consultant to develop this comprehensive master plan. If it's using the conservation easement as the basis of that plan, you're going to have all sorts of information. They're going to carve out the forest to accommodate all of the permitted uses that are defined, the 19 uses that are defined in the conservation easement under whatever it is, part 4. And that's going to be an absolute waste of time when it comes to the actual application or transfer of the conservation easement to its future steward. And so in order to avoid all of that potential waste of money, time, conversation, debate, whatever, I think there needs to be a conversation with the city, with the land trust, and a look into the future, how and asking the question, how is this all going to come together to benefit the community? And the community needs to be honored for the 40 years of collective effort to protect the open space of the forest and keep it intact. That needs to be clearly honored. And I think, again, using the conservation easement as a vehicle forward makes a lot of sense. The reality here is if the conservation easement is not transferred, it will be extinguished by the city, and there will be no protections on this property except for critical areas and a few other things. But basically, there's two pathways forward. One pathway is to move forward with conversations with the land trust, with the city, and start working on the ultimate goal. And whether that includes a master plan with a management component, because the land trust would need very clear management definition, who's responsible for what, or the park district dissolves, the city and the conservation easement hasn't been transferred, the city then extinguishes the conservation easement and turns it into a park, or does whatever they want to with the forest.
And
And I
just to-
realize that
could I
you're
just
thinking, go ahead.
Could I just update you a little bit? So we have had discussions with several other parties, including the Land Trust, in the past few months. And those conversations have led us to believe that there was a point at which the Land Trust wasn't very interested in doing this. They are currently interested and willing to do it. However, they have changed some of their policies and procedures internally fairly recently that include setting aside a sufficient amount of money to defend a legal defense of the elements of the conservation easement. So our most recent discussion is that they are working their way through the process. We're working our way through the process, and we hope to engage them over the next few months around those issues, including they have a much more sophisticated process right now where they basically pay a fee into a pool, a risk pool, that pays legal fees for defending conservation easements, and there would be a certain amount we would expect it to dedicate to that activity. So
Right.
there would be a dedicated ability to defend the conservation easement legally, should it come to that. And with the many potential uses that have been indicated, that was one of the reasons that they felt that amount might be substantial, might be, 50, 100,000 or more dollars to ensure that capacity to defend the conservation easement was preserved. So we've had those discussions. We are in the process of moving forward with the Land Trust with them. And we believe that that's something we'll be able to achieve. And I think very rightly you point out that there are many, if you look at our mission, it's going to be hard to be true to that mission and allow some of the things that are outlined in that kind of laundry list that was developed at one time of possible things that could take place. And I would personally concur with you entirely that a renegotiation and clarification of what on that list is consistent with the core mission, which is preserving the ecological functions, the environmental functions of this forest.
Right.
And so I think that's kind of where we as a board have come, and that's where our discussions are with the Land Trust. Just to update you a bit on that.
Okay.
But I'm sorry to interrupt, but just thought you should know that information.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Frank. I guess I'm kind of running off on this tangent, but I guess what I was thinking is a logical pathway forward is to align the conservation easement with the easement on the interurban wetland through an amendment process that would provide more consistent management. And it would also, in that process, potentially remove some of that laundry list in Part 4 of permitted uses that are inconsistent with the primary purpose of the conservation easement, at least in my interpretation of the conservation easement. And that would also help streamline the process, master plan management and directives, and moving forward. So that's basically where I'm going with this.
It sounds like a strong recommendation and in alignment with, I think, where we had intended to go. So I think that's and you thought about it more clearly, perhaps even than we did, which is very, very helpful. We hadn't considered aligning it with the adjacent 20 acres, what people affectionately call the beaver pond, but that wetland that they already have a responsibility for. And I think the continuity of the two they're inseparable, actually, in my view.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very wise thing to do. It would also give us a good vehicle for renegotiating the specifics
Right.
of the agreement and clarifying what might be possible when considered in view of the core mission that we've
Mhm.
taken on,
Mhm.
and that the people voted on originally. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and when you say it that way, it makes sense. It also provides some leverage for the board in the sense that if you have talked or have some kind of working agreement with the Whatcom Land Trust for them to take over the conservation easement, and you want to align the two conservation easements and the management, it gives you the leverage to work with the city to amend the conservation easement, to reach that agreement, to make that alignment, and to reduce the potential headache of management and stewardship of that property over time for the land trust, if that makes sense.
It makes great sense. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. And that might be possible with what Bob has offered in terms of actually having an interlocal agreement about how we'll move forward. We
Mhm.
potentially, I defer to Bob about this, we could include this concept as a core element of that interlocal agreement. Would
Yeah.
that be your vision too, Ann?
Sure. Yep. Absolutely.
And
Whatever it
Bob,
takes.
Bob, do you think that could be done? What the clarification Ann's made and that proposal for direction? Is an interlocal agreement a place where we can begin to take that direction?
It might be a good forum. I need to think about that a little bit. To me, the bigger picture is figuring out the best way to, and I think the interlocal agreement raises some separate issues, which I do want to talk about again. But to me, what Ann's saying makes a lot of sense. I think it's consistent with what we've been talking about at the board meetings and what the board has been saying, that this property is not all by itself. It's part of a greater ecosystem, and taking that other land trust property into account, and perhaps others, is something that should be done. I totally agree with the idea of eliminating some of those. I think it's a really good idea to eliminate some of those permitted uses in the conservation easement. Those were negotiated at a different time, a different place, with a different parks director. And they were there for a reason, but if we can get rid of them, I think that would be best. And I do believe this is an opportunity to get rid of them. The only thing I would like to maybe add my take on is, I'm not suggesting Ann was saying this, but I don't see this as an either or between amending the conservation easement and going forward with the park master plan. I think we should do both and figure out how to get both accomplished. Both are important. One of the benefits of the park master plan is it comes with a public process, and that public process can help inform not just what the park master plan looks like, but what the amendment to the conservation easement should look like. It's something that I think we do need to have the public weigh in on. There was public input on that conservation easement at multiple points in the process when it was first adopted. And if we're going to change it, the public will need to be invited in to talk about what those changes look like. And I think the best way of inviting the public in is through the master planning process. So I actually think they can work hand in hand together, and the conservation easement can be, amending the conservation easement could be one of the objectives of the master planning process. One of the outcomes of that master planning process would be to come out with an amended conservation easement that more holistically looks at the ecosystem, eliminates a lot of those built environment type things, and is something the community can support. So how do we get there? That's the question then. And do we have, this is something, I think we should have some discussion on. I think everything that I've said and that Ann said, my guess is, just listening to the board members, there's a lot of support for on this board. The question then is, how do we tactically get to that position? Do we feel like we can do it under the current framework that the Parks Department has set out? And I think it would be too disruptive to tell them to stop the process because they're already starting, they're looking forward to June. June is around the corner. So I think we need to work within the process. The question is, do we want to try to modify it such that the Park District becomes an equal partner in this master planning process? Is that important to us? Or do we think we can achieve our objectives as one of the participants, as one of the stakeholders? And how much weight will the city give us as one of the stakeholders? This board has had many more public meetings and taken a lot more public input than the City Parks Department has on this forest in the last several years. There's no debate about that. And it's great that the city is now engaged. We've been asking them to engage in this for many years. Now that they are, I think we want to make sure, the Park District Board wants to make sure that its good work isn't lost and that its voice is heard and respected and objectives achieved. So that's really the question. Do we want to assert ourselves in it? Because if we're going to say, it's one thing to say we want to reopen the conservation easement as part of the master planning process. That's something that, we can talk about, but it's a separate topic then to say, we as a park district want to be co-leading this process, co-overseeing this master plan process with the City Parks Department. And that will take a separate discussion and it will include a separate set of issues. And I suspect it will be met with some resistance at City Hall if we do try to go that direction. And I know there's friends on the council and so forth, and the mayor perhaps would be supportive of the Parks District. But I think that's definitely something the Parks Department is not used to doing. That is sharing a responsibility for a park master plan for a park that it manages. So I think I'm open to trying it, and I'm happy to try it if that's the direction the Park District Board wants to go. But I think we definitely have some communications that need to happen with the city at all levels to make that happen.
Could I add just a little more information for those guests tonight at tonight's meeting? The Park District has held and supported a number of efforts to create depth and breadth in terms of the assessment of the potential of the community forest, in terms of surveys, the mycological surveys and other plant and animal surveys that have taken place since Ann did her original work. We've also held a series of planning and public hearings on the trail systems and how they might align, both in terms of model trail layouts, but also on what the criteria should be for building or closing trails that John McLaughlin took the lead on. So there's a great deal of additional information that's been gathered that needs to go into this process that isn't in that baseline study that needs to be added as well. Another reason that there probably is a role for us to play in that process going forward to ensure that that information is present in the planning process. Again, based on broad public hearings and long and detailed processes that have already taken place. I'd like to open it up to our commissioners to ask Ann or Bob additional questions about what's being discussed.
Okay. Yes.
Sure, you.
First of all, the 19 items, I don't have them in my head floating around, but if we could list off the 19 items, then we could remember what we're talking about here, you know, what we'd like to get rid of or not. And also this subcommittee that's going to be working every 2 weeks on this planning process that she's appointing people to. How many people are there? Is it one person, one vote? And you know, how will the structure be? Because if we have a fair representation on the committee, then we could probably expect a fairer process. So these are just considerations that we should keep in mind, I think.
I think that we will find Hugh and Frank and Bob and everyone. I think that we will find as we get into discussions, preliminary discussions, my sense is that we will simply make our position, our prerogatives and our commitment felt. And then in the natural course of things with Vince, with Frank, with perhaps Hugh Beatty, with whomever else is involved in it, I'm supposed to be on it. With us involved in it, we will have a satisfactory hand in determining the direction of it. I'm a little uneasy about trying to be definite about our a 50-50 sort of power or prerogative, range of prerogatives that we have. It seems to me that our influence will naturally emerge. May I also say, respecting what Anne has said, respecting contiguous properties and the rules that are now in force regarding them, the hope that they will coincide with the guidelines in the conservation easement that we have. It seems to me, Frank and Bob, it's my sense, you kind of alluded to this, that we're not dealing with Kelly Linville, God rest her soul, or God bless her, or with, what was the fellow's name? I've forgotten it. James King. We're dealing with very sympathetic people in Seth Fleetwood and Nicole Oliver, and I believe her staff. And I think that the city council is by and large sympathetic, and that a revision, my hope would be that the kind of revision that Mr. Carmichael is talking about, to include considerations that Anne has brought up, that Bob's way of conceptualizing this, Frank, Bob's way of conceptualizing it and presenting it to Alan Mariner or to Seth Fleetwood, that it will be, I wouldn't say smooth sailing, but that we will be in the company of sympathetic people who want this whole process to go forward. If we want to tweak it a little bit, to bring into alignment the conservation easement with the contiguous property, I don't see what their objection would be. We're not trying to do anything underhanded or circuitous. We're just trying to come to grips with the realities of the situation, that it will make it, that it will facilitate development of a master plan for the property, and that it will, as Anne says, save money and time. I wonder if something could be articulated so far as I believe you're talking, Bob, about a renegotiation or an amendment to the interlocal agreement or to the actual conservation easement. It seems to me that the city, if these things were presented right, that they would see the good sense to this, and that the Parks Board and that the steering committee members would have a solid footing to work on, and we would be able to get on with our business and do it pretty quickly. Maybe that's too optimistic. But if Bob can articulate the ideas that are floating around, respecting Anne's ideas about the conservation easement, if Bob can articulate these things and come up, Frank, with an amendment to the interlocal agreement, perhaps also to the conservation easement, and present it to the city, it seems to me that it would very much help the people on the steering committee from our end to go in to talk with the Parks Department.
Thank you, John. And John McLaughlin, did you have comments or thoughts?
I echo much of what I've heard from both you, Frank, and Ann. I think that once we dissolve, we have limited leverage on what happens, and so this is our opportunity to set things in place. I also agree very strongly with Ann that much of what's allowed in the conservation easement is antithetical to the mission of the park district, and it also will make the job of the Parks Department a lot more difficult in managing this place. And so I think it's to the benefit of everyone to heed Ann's wisdom and to work with sympathetic people in the city government to come up with a conservation easement that works a lot better, and then to work with whoever receives the conservation easement so that it can be enforced and is effective. Do we have some work out for us? We also, I think, need to engage the public, because ultimately that's where our leverage comes from, is to really engage the public in both the process of gaining support for a better conservation easement and in master planning. You're muted, Frank.
Any other thoughts from other commissioners at this point about what's been said? John Hymas? John, you're muted.
There we go.
There you go.
Yep. All right. Yes, I want to agree with John McLaughlin that most of this is going to be neighborhood people that are going to get into the master plan. And so I pretty much agree with him and my long-winded fellow commissioner, John. Anyway, yeah, I think that a lot of this is going to be neighborhood pushed. And so as far as, like being some kind of partners with the city, I don't think so. I think that the park department is going to do this the way that they've done it in the past. And I think we have plenty of friends in city government right now. So let's just get on with it. That's what I want to say.
Thanks, John. Just to clarify, I think that my vision would be that we certainly want to talk to the Parks Department, but just like when the Parks Department tried to collapse the community forest into a Fairhaven Park plan, I made calls to the mayor and to key people on the city council, and very quickly that went away.
Right.
I think that we do have very good support in the publicly elected officials that represent the people. We obviously are elected by the people that actually put up the money to acquire this property along with the city. And I think we have a very strong standing to speak out and to participate. So I'm optimistic about the opportunity for the city and us to partner in this in a very more effective and productive way. I guess what I'm thinking now is how would we make the consensus sort of that I've heard a reality. Bob, I'd look to you for formulation maybe of a statement, summary statement about what are the most effective legal ways to actuate this? Would it be to formally propose an amendment to the conservation easement? Would it be to begin to work on a interlocal agreement? I think, or both. Do you have a recommendation, Bob?
Yeah, so my recommendation, having listened carefully to all the board, it is based on a perception, my perception, that the board, at least the majority of the board, would prefer to participate in the process as it currently exists, as opposed to change the master planning process fundamentally by putting the Park District Board at some kind of co-presiding entity over the process. And if that's the case, then we're working, we don't necessarily need an interlocal agreement to participate in the process. Maybe it'll turn out we would decide there's a benefit for one reason or another, but I don't think that's worth the time and energy. Based on what I'm hearing, what I do think is worth the time and energy is for the Park District to take a look at that conservation easement, the way it's written, and identify how we would like to see it changed. Specifically, how would we like to see that document changed? And it would include eliminating the permitted uses. It may include looking at the other easement the land trust holds to see about what Ann said, trying to align it with that easement, make sure they're consistent, maybe even make a reference to it. I think it also, it would start with us doing something like that so that we're comfortable with it, and then reaching out to the city and the land trust to initiate discussions. Having represented the Park District, had the privilege, absolute privilege, to represent this Park District from the beginning, and having been in those meetings with James King, I totally agree that we have a much more friendly Parks Director than we did back then. And I think we can more likely than not obtain some favorable amendments to that conservation easement to make it more in line with our mission. And similarly, I think in the mayor's office, we have a much more sympathetic mayor. And the city attorney is going to be the same, Mr. Mariner, but he takes direction from his client. So I think those are the two main differences. And as far as moving ahead, I think maybe if this steering committee is starting to meet in June, and we have our members on the committee, one of the things that we could do is raise the issue at the committee level, at the steering committee, say that the Parks Board, which you're still an independent municipal entity, legal entity with the right to make decisions on your own, you can tell them that you've been looking at this and have decided you want to take another look at this conservation easement, and fold discussions about amending the conservation easement into the master planning process, and maybe start thinking about that. I think this is the sort of thing that will require some discussion at the steering committee level as to how to best bring the public into that process, so that you can identify what the process looks like. And that can happen now. That can start at your next steering committee meeting. Also, coming out of this meeting, if the board wants to give me direction to look at potential amendments to the conservation easement and to bring those to the board at the next meeting, I'd be happy to do that. And if we get it to a point where we've eliminated a number of the things that we would like to eliminate, and have made the adjustments we want to make, we could then be in a position to actually introduce this maybe in after our June meeting, maybe in the summer, July, August, whatever's going on at the steering committee at that time. But give them a heads up now that this is coming, and let them know what the general nature of it's going to be, to basically put some narrow sideboards on the built environment in that forest. So they can, and you could have some discussions even about getting that heads up. But I think we can move forward on these tracks together, and one can inform the other.
Could I just back up a little bit, Bob? I guess I'd like our commissioners specifically to weigh in on the issue of whether or not they believe that we should be co-equal partners in this planning process. It's clear that we represent the people who put the money up to preserve this land. And it's very clear what our mission is, I think. And our mission is actually quite different than the parks program. Ours speaks, as at every meeting that I've been at, and I believe every meeting we've held, we review that mission very explicitly. And what it calls for very clearly, and this was in what everybody voted on in the first place, was that to in perpetuity protect in public ownership the ecological, recreational, and educational functions of this parcel. And I think those are tall orders at this point. Preserving just the ecological integrity alone is a tall order. There's both a restoration component and there's also a substantial planning component of that. In order to adequately fund restoration, that may be an ongoing project. That may not be something that's easy to do. It's expensive. There's a lot of damage that's been done that needs to be undone. And as we heard at our last meeting, it's actually in quite good shape if properly managed. You know, when we looked at invasive species, for example, they're pretty focused. I mean, but there needs to be the resource to take action on those things or they become much worse. So back to our commissioners. Would you like
Frank, could Vince has been wanting to say something and she'll be on the steering committee.
I'm sorry. Vincent, would you like to speak?
Well, I just wanted to bring up, this isn't actually relevant to your question, Frank, about do we want to be co-equal partners with the city parks department? That I don't have an opinion on right now, but I did want to remind you, like, well, Bob, if you make up a draft amendment to the conservation easement, think about, are you going to eliminate bicycles? Are you going to eliminate dogs? Because that, and then, whatever we decide to do and bring in the public, it'd be a good idea to have, a press release or some kind of public statement. But we have to be careful if that's where we're going, because that'll immediately raise hackles. So I just wanted to caution if that's where we're going.
I don't
I
think
personally wasn't thinking about that.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's got a
Eliminating
vision.
bicycles or dogs.
And of course, in all of our discussions over the time that I've been on the board, those are issues about inconsistencies in use that would need to be addressed in the planning process. For example, if there are bicycles, how do we make it so there's a place for them that don't run little old ladies off the trails? Certainly has happened. Or if we have dogs, do they need to strictly be on leashes so that they don't chase the wildlife?
Can I say one thing about that? In the conservation easement, as it is written today, there's discrepancies in the permitted uses and the non-permitted uses. And for instance, trails are allowed, and yet they're under restricted use. Trail improvement for bicycles is not allowed. So there needs to be some review and consistency built into the conservation easement, again, to make it more manageable. And if you all take a look at it, Hugh, I've got the 19 permitted uses, and 12 of those are built facilities of some kind. So it just kind of gives you a sense of what that means.
Okay.
Yeah, so there are some challenges in negotiating that agreement with parks. They do parks. They don't do community forests generally. I think they're going to need additional input about that. And I think that agreement was negotiated, I think, in good faith, but I think there are clear inconsistencies that will need to be resolved before we move forward. So thank you, Vince. Back to the question, would people consider a co-equal partnership with Parks in moving this process forward.
It seems to me, Frank, I'll just shoot off my mouth right at the top. It seems to me that we are going to evolve into that position of a co-equal partnership simply because of the time that we have all given to this. It seems to me that the natural evolution of the discussion will make us co-equal, and that we can assert our presence. And God knows that if you're there, you're going to make it known. And so will I, and so will Vince. And if Bob gets involved in this, is this something that you want to specify, Frank? It seems to me that that's your question, and I'm indifferent to that. It seems to me that it will develop that way anyway.
In our discussions in the past, what I had heard was a significant support for asking to have co-equal status with the city in this process. But perhaps I misunderstood. John McLaughlin, just going through the group. Do you have a view on this?
Thank you. If you look at the outline or the draft outline that Lane Potter walked back a little bit, it's not clear where anyone is a co-equal partner. It's clear that they're doing it, and they may consult with various stakeholders, and we might be listed as a stakeholder group, but no, there's no co-equalness at all in anything we've received from them. So I would strongly agree that we assert our co-equalness for the reasons that have been spoken.
Okay.
Did you
Fair
want to comment?
I still haven't seen the list of who's on the damn committee, you know?
I don't believe
You
so.
really count votes when you see who's on the committee, you know? Then you know if you're co-equal or if you're just token, you know?
Well, I think we're not considered co-equal. We're considered one amongst many stakeholders
Yeah.
in the current process.
Oh, for example, is Lummies a stakeholder in it? Did they invite them?
Is who?
Did the Lummies get invited? Are they stakeholders?
I don't believe they were.
Yeah, see?
Frank, can you go to Vince again?
I was going to ask John Hymas. We'll get to Vince in just a minute, but I think I wanted to get everybody, all the commissioners, a chance to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. No, I think that we should be co-equals. We are elected in an entity that actually is running this whole thing. So, no, I agree. We should be co-equal entities with the city.
Vincent, did you have a comment?
Well, yeah, just that there's 4 of us on this subcommittee, but we don't know among how many. I mean, we don't know how many are in total. So like Hugh says, we don't know how many votes we really have. We have 4 votes.
Just to take a second to express my thoughts about it. One is that I think, as was pointed out, we are elected and we represent the people in the Park District and the substantial financial contribution they made. And I don't believe that we are just another stakeholder. So I think structurally, I believe we are co-equal partners. And I think we need to assert that at this point to bring clarity to that issue. I don't think they just tell us what our role is. I think we're elected officials. We've raised this money. That's a very substantial contribution. We have a legal agreement that says we're quite different than Recreation Northwest or any of the other partners that might show up. So at least I would strongly, like John Hymas said, I believe that we are co-equal partners and we need to assert that. Could we, do we want to formally take a vote on that then?
And well, before we do, I'm glad you followed up with that, Frank, because I had heard different things and I misread the board. I apologize for that. Thank you for circling back on the topic. So my question now would be, what does co-equal mean? does that mean that the park master plan, in order to be a valid plan, are we going to say it has to be approved by the park district and the city both? Is that what we're going to say?
Yeah, I think final approval would be consensus between the two entities. And I also believe it means that in setting the agenda and the issues to be considered, we do that with the city prior to taking it to meetings.
Yeah, well, I started with final approval because if we have final approval authority, then everything else flows from that. Because if we're going to say the park district has final approval authority to that they have to approve it and we have to approve it before it becomes a city master plan, then we're going to necessarily have all the authorities of setting meeting agendas and so forth. So yes, I agree that the setting the agendas and outlining how things work will be partly our responsibility. I don't disagree with anything that you've said. I've thought about both sides of this co-equal question, and I'm more than happy to implement the board's will either way. The only, and this is not I'm not saying don't do it. I just want to raise the point that so it's out there on the table, that it will take, we have limited resources, limited energy, limited time. That's a truism for all of us. Everybody has limits, and the board has limits. So it will take some time, energy, and resources to accomplish co-equal partner status. Maybe it will be easy, maybe it won't. I don't know that. If it turns into a fight, we may want to reconsider. If it turns out easy and the city says yes, I think that's a great idea, then I think that it won't be a problem. But I guess I would want to go into it thinking that we do have those limits, and there are some really important things to achieve here working with the city that are probably, in the scheme of things, the perpetuity of things, more important than whether we have our name on the approval or not. I think the most important thing is getting a good conservation easement and a good master plan that everybody's happy with. And how we get there, to me, doesn't matter as much. Maybe it does, maybe getting there does require the co-equal status. I just don't think that's the principal goal that we have. If it's necessary to get there, then of course, we absolutely should do it. And I don't think there's a problem starting down the road and asking for it and seeing what kind of response we get. If it's going to turn into, we have to spend a lot of the board's political capital to accomplish the goal and maybe make some people mad, then I think we need to reassess. But I don't have any problem starting down the road and seeing if the city's amenable to it.
Ann Isinger, you got a comment?
Yeah, I just would like to make one comment. For consistency's sake, which I'm kind of hung up on, the conservation easement required both the city and the Park District Board as signatories. The baseline document, again, required both the city and the district as signatories. I would suggest, for consistency's sake, justification going into the master planning process on equal footing with the city and be signatories on that document. And I just think it makes sense.
I think that's a very strong evidence for asking for a co-equal partnership, Frank and Bob. I think what Ann has just said, that's a very good starting point to say that we have had equal authority on the previous things.
I don't think we need to ask. I think that we should just state that let's keep it the way it has been.
Oh, nice strategy, John. Good.
I think what we need to do though is to then put the time into meeting with the park staff to begin to set those agendas and do that work. So I think that's a good thing. I think it would behoove us to also have a discussion with the mayor and with leadership on the council as well to I believe they would be fully supportive of this in recognition of the funds that have been raised and the additional work that's been done. Vince's many years of service in this effort, and John McLaughlin's endless hours of work and the board's work in general has been in that direction. Vince?
Well,
Can I ask, I don't feel authorized to call Lane in city parks and say, how's it going? When's our next meeting? How many people there? I feel I'd be overstepping my bounds to do that at this point. But Frank, maybe that would be something that you could do,
No, I'd be happy to do it, sure.
as first a member of the steering committee, but also the president of CCA, you have the standing to ask her, where are we? How many people are you inviting as stakeholders? How do we look?
Yeah, that's a great idea. I'm happy.
Frank, do you think that it would be a good strategy to go to Seth first, to give him a heads up on this so that he might put the word into Nicole? It's your call, but I wonder.
I think that's a very prudent thing to do, John, and I'd be happy to talk with Seth about it. I've talked with him about other things fairly recently, so I'd be happy to do that.
Frank, John McLaughlin has
John,
his
sorry,
hand
I
up.
can only see a few people. I can't see everybody. John McLaughlin?
He's in the darkness.
Thank you. So I'd like to suggest spinning the requesting versus demanding or stating co-equal status in a positive way. Given all that we've put into it and all of our experience with this place and with the concepts involved, the outcome is going to be a whole lot better if we are an integral partner. And so it's in the Parks Department's best interest to make us recognize us as a co-equal partner, because it's going to be better for them. It's going to be better for the public. It's going to be better for the place.
Nicely put, John.
I think I hear a consensus about that. Let's just get closure about that. I hear a clear consensus with really no one abstaining or disagreeing. So let's move forward with that. And then I think the next step would be I'll reach out to the mayor. I'll work with Bob to make sure we've got the basic information correct that we want to put forward. And I want to thank you, and Vince, I want to thank you as well for helping inform our discussion and our thoughts and our motion forward. If there's not more discussion of this item, we might want to go ahead and move forward with our agenda. It is approaching, we're already about 18 minutes over time, so it might be good to move on to some of the other items we have to do. They're relatively straightforward, but they are important things. Just a reminder that Annalise Burns is going to do a presentation on the 28th board meeting. There's, as you know, an urban plan that's with wildlife corridors and forest structures and restoration opportunities and fire risk management are being considered by the city. And she's going to come and explain that to what that process is. We'd invited her to this meeting and she felt she had to do the presentation to the parks folks first. Very understandable, but we'll have that discussion. June 23rd, there'll be a public hearing on that, on the restoration was the next thing. And I think those are informational more than anything. And then the last thing that we need to do in terms of old business is to talk about this in-person meeting or in-person Zoom meeting hybrid plan. And Robin, do you want to talk about the technical and logistical issues about that?
I do, because it affects those two other meetings and what we decide to do. And I talked to a couple of IT people, our guy and another friend of mine. I talked to a sound technician. I did a lot of internet research, and I also did a practice session. And the first thing I want to say is that if we're going to include Zoom, I think it has to be an indoor meeting. That there are too many things, audio difficulties and visual difficulties in doing an in-person / Zoom meeting outside. Some of those things, or that microphones pick up all the extraneous noise. Like in the one we did the other day, it was a constant bird chirping that was driving people
God
crazy.
peppers.
And like now, if somebody's doing busy work and it gets noisy, I just mute them. But if we, in this particular scenario, we would only have one mic. So whatever's out there, everybody would hear. And it also makes it harder to hear unless the microphone's right in front of you, at least the one I have right now. And the other part is like, if you're outside, if you're outside with your phone, you can't see it when you're in the sun. So then you have to be in the shade, but then people can't really see your face if you're in the shade. So there's just a lot more problems if you do outdoor with a Zoom. So my recommendation, if we're going to include Zoom, which personally I think is a good idea, that we have an indoor meeting. The next thing I wanted to see is that it seems like a fairly simple, if I can describe the setup, that basically everybody would have either a computer or a phone, so their face could be seen in terms of the commissioners and Bob and I. Then, and we would have like one extra, like maybe my phone set up for the people who come to the meeting when they do public speaking. Like when they do public comment period. The microphone, which I have right now, it's the one that we used back when we were doing in-person meetings. It really has to, unless everybody talks very loudly, it has to be passed from one person to the next so that the sound comes through. And I would do another practice indoor with that to see what the limits are, but that's, from what I can see right now, that would be it. I would also have a wireless speaker so that everything that was said would be able to be heard, like we could hear people talking on the Zoom. I would mute and unmute the wireless speaker. And I'll have to do some practice sessions with that.
Yeah, one of the things that wreaks havoc with these kinds of meetings is if everybody doesn't have their own speaker on their own device muted, that will create feedback loops and really be difficult. So we have to be certain that everybody stays muted with this single microphone and single speaker.
Yes, that's one of the key things that
it is,
once you come into the meeting, you never touch your audio. Because yeah, the feedback loop is, we've heard it sometimes in here, and it just, nobody wants to listen to that. Let's see, my things. The other thing we have to have, in whatever space we meet, we have to have Wi-Fi so that we have a good signal for the Zoom. So, and if we're going to do a public hearing indoor, in person, with also Zoom capabilities, then I also think that we need to have a projector and a screen so that we can, if people are presenting on Zoom, the people in the room can see it. And if people in the room are presenting, I haven't figured that whole part out yet, but, and so we would need to find one. And in case any of you guys have one, or we could ask around and find one we could borrow. I would also want to do a practice session with 2 commissioners at a time, because I realize we can't do everybody. But I would set that up so that we could do that, just so everybody knows how it's going. And then I also looked at spaces. And for the library, it sounds like, I talked to them yesterday and they said that they probably won't open their meeting rooms until everything is pretty much back to normal. So that could be, I mean, it's hard to say, but it could be a while. I checked with the Chuckanut Center that's there at Fairhaven Park. I thought that might be an idea, but that is not going to work. But I did talk to the Firehouse Cafe and Performing Arts Center, and they have Wi-Fi. They would let us use it for free. The one caveat, it depends on if it works in their schedule, like if they would have a paying gig on that particular time. So does anybody have any questions about that, all of that?
One additional thing is it has to be within our boundaries, right? That's the other issue about it. One thing I could offer is that I have a medical office that has a conference room, that it's not a really big space. It comfortably seats probably 8 people, and there's a little more room in it. If you want, you may have been I don't know if you've been in the conference room, but there is a conference room there. I'd be happy to make that available for our meetings as well, if you like. One thing about it is that the owner of the building requires masks in all public spaces, so it would require that we wear masks, including all the visitors. But I'd be happy to offer that there. We've got good Wi-Fi, and like I say, it wouldn't accommodate 30 people, but it could accommodate all of us and a few guests.
Where is it?
It's above Fairhaven Bicycle,
Oh, okay.
or above it's on the 3rd floor. The Fairhaven Bicycle is actually on the 2nd floor, because it's 6 floors down, another floor in the back. But it's just the 3rd floor of Fairhaven Bicycle, and it would be easy to have a meeting there.
Is it have an elevator, or do I have to
It
climb?
does have an elevator, yep.
Oh, good.
Probably easier than the other places we have meetings for you, Hugh, in that respect. It's got a good elevator and good flat access going in and out. So add that to the possible places, if you would, Robin, or unless people want to make a decision now.
I would also just want to say that I think for the upcoming public hearing, I wouldn't want to have our first combination in-person Zoom meeting be the public hearing, because you know there's probably going to be some technical issues. And so I would recommend that we don't start doing that with the June meeting.
I think public hearings, I would rather we do that on Zoom for now. I think the logistics of doing something in person for a public hearing would be very great. I think insurmountable for the technical resources we have. Yes, John Hymus.
John, you're muted.
Okay, now you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, maybe we should wait till stage 4. Stage 4? Anyway.
It's 4.
I think phase 4, right, John?
Oh, okay, phase 4. Yes, that's what I meant.
The governor phase 4. That
Right.
Just the technical projection, I think probably that's going to happen in July. I think that's pretty likely to happen in July. So it's not going to be in the far distance, but relatively soon.
Yeah.
But I think for now, it probably looks really challenging to do in-person meetings, but
Yeah.
I'd listen to the wisdom of the group. Anybody want to make a motion on it one way or the other?
I don't think you're not
We
going
just
to
need
change
consensus.
anything. If you're not going to change anything, I don't think you need a motion. I would also say that, again, I kind of know what's going on with the smaller municipalities anyway. Nobody is meeting in person yet. And so my guess is people are going to wait for phase 4, as John Hymas said.
Yeah.
I think that's most likely.
And I think the governor is I think it's pretty likely the governor's going to try to move that along probably the end of June, but maybe not. I think we could certainly wait for phase 4. That would be the easiest logistically, I think, by far.
Mhm.
And I would hope that the library system would make their space available by that time.
Yeah.
So is the consensus then not now, not yet, but sometime, and we've got a good plan when we do decide to go there? Is that the? I see heads nodding. There we go. Raise your, there we go. We got thumbs all around. We'll let that discussion then go forward and put that on the agenda for a future meeting to review it when it looks like we're moving headed towards phase 4.
Tell the governor needs to get a phaser.
Great. And then the new business is really about the safety deposit box. Very confusing for me, but it sounds like they are reviewing their safety deposit policies. It sounds like they don't necessarily have all the paperwork that they used to have. We need to go in and sign it again. And I think that's scheduled for, is it this Friday where John and I go in? And I think it's just John and I at this point, although I
Correct.
don't understand why we had to have Steve from the treasurer from the county before and why we wouldn't need him this time. It's just puzzling to me.
Well, that was for the changing the signatory on the checking account. And so doesn't need to be on the safety deposit box. So
I see. That makes sense. Yeah. So it's just John and I, John Hymas and I, we need to show up with our keys and they're going to
I
give us a
have your
different.
key, John.
They're going to give us a different safety deposit box. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we have to change it. If we change names, we have to change the box. It just makes it simpler for them for some reason. I don't know. But
Yeah.
anyway, hopefully this will be the last time we have to deal with it.
So the last time we signed these things, we didn't. Well, okay. At any rate, we'll show up. And is this coming Friday? Is that right, Robin? What was the date?
Yeah.
It's Friday at 11 and the board has to pass this resolution I sent out.
Right. So there is a resolution.
19. And then I need to come get signatures. I'll get some tonight and the rest tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay, I move approval of the resolution to get a new safety deposit box, and Frank and John will be the signatures.
So if I understand it correctly, this is resolution 19 that we're voting on. Hugh has moved. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously. And then Robin will get this to us for signature and then we'll have it by Friday. So that's resolution 19. Then we also have that other document that we're going to come back and consider. What do we need to do on resolution 20?
Resolution 20, I forwarded you a new version of resolution 20 at the very beginning of the meeting. The reason for changing, well, let me start. The original reason for changing our policy, resolution 20 changes a board policy and procedure on regular meetings. The underlying section of what I sent to you gives the board flexibility to hold meetings at an alternate location from the Fairhaven Library fireplace room, and sets out how that is done. You'd have to give out 10 days prior notice to all the commissioners listed on the district's webpage, and notice of the change via email to the friends of the CCFPD. So that was easy enough. John Brown at the beginning of the meeting mentioned, why are we going to meet on Thursday? Well, we didn't pick that up in the changes. So that's the original board policy and procedures set out the meeting as the fourth Thursday at 7 p.m. and that did not ever get changed. So we can change that as part of this resolution 20 as well. I sent an updated resolution to everybody. It's in your email if you haven't seen it yet. The only difference from what you were sent previously is it memorializes the meeting date as Wednesday instead of Thursday and 6 p.m. instead of 7 p.m. I think that it's a good thing to adopt this resolution just to provide the board flexibility to change the meeting location if the Fairhaven Library becomes a problem for some reason, and also to change the date and time for a regular meeting as opposed to having the meeting be required a special meeting. You have more flexibility with regular meetings. So by doing this, I think it just gives the board more flexibility on its regular meetings. And it also brings it into consistency with the practice of having the November and December meetings other than the fourth Wednesday of the month because of the holidays. So I think it's overdue to have this amendment anyway, but it was brought on by COVID to provide stability. And I would suggest the consideration of adopting resolution 20 as it was submitted at the meeting tonight.
Move it up, resolution 20 as amended tonight.
You has moved that as amended, and that's the revised version listing Wednesday as our meeting day and 6 p.m. as our meeting time.
Days notice for everybody. Yeah.
And then changing the meeting place can be done with 10 days notice as noted in the draft. Do I hear a second?
Second.
I'll second that.
So moved and seconded. Is there further discussion of this? This seems straightforward. Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Hearing no opposition, this was passed unanimously. Let's see. So I think that concludes the business that we have to do tonight. Is there further discussion? We go now into the rest of our new business. That is pretty routine. The monthly expense and cash flow sheets, if people had a chance to review those, they basically show our WECU account has a balance of $2,821. Treasurer's report shows that we have an unencumbered beginning balance of as of 4/1 of $265,016 and an ending unencumbered balance on 4/30 of $484,067. We received tax revenues of $267,821, and we paid out $2,023 in operating expenses and $46,746 on towards the loan to the city of Bellingham. 2021 is $598,487. Do I have a motion to approve the payroll distribution wages to Robin Albro for 24 hours in April, gross income of $600. Others were informational. This actually requires a motion.
I move to accept.
John Hymas moves to accept the approving the district payroll to Robin Albro for the $600 for her time in the month of April. Do I hear a
Correct.
second?
It doesn't do well in the battery port setting.
Second. It hasn't been seconded.
Moved and seconded. All those further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, this passes unanimously. The next item is the consent agenda. Motion to approve the following. would be considered. That is a payment in April of, on April 5th, the April 15th invoices from Carmichael and Clark of $1,511.50 for regular professional services, and payment on the invoice from Robin Albro of $35.84 for mileage in February, March, and April. Do I hear a motion?
Move approval of the payments on the consent agenda.
Moves, do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. All, further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Just a reminder that Robin will be emailing 3 board members right after the meeting, myself, John Brown, and John McLaughlin. We need to respond in the affirmative for the consent agenda and payroll. And then Robin is going to bring around the other resolution for signatures prior to Friday. Any further discussion? Any further issues? Hearing none, I would like to adjourn the meeting, noting that Wednesday, June 23rd
Frank.
is our next meeting. Yes.
I forgot, I wanted to add one thing. I'm currently in the process of filing with the annual report with the state auditor's office. So I forgot to include it on the agenda, but I have started it and I'll probably finish it tomorrow.
All right.
It's due on
All
the
right.
30th, so.
So noted, Robin. Thank you. And I wanted to thank you for all the work you've done this past month and the month before, making all these things happen, and the research you did on making possible joint Zoom meetings with public meetings possible in the future, at a future date. So thank you very much, as always. Thank you. Any other
My
items?
pleasure.
Thank you, Robin. Any other business or considerations or comments? Thank you all very much. I hold the meeting adjourned.